The euphoria of capturing Thang Long quickly evaporated for Thoat Hoan. His great victory was hollow. The city, which should have been their supply hub, was a deserted furnace. The Scorched Earth tactic was now fully operational. The Mongol army, designed for speed and combat, was suddenly paralyzed by hunger. This was the first phase of Tran Hung Dao's masterful counterplan.
Look at this. It's nothing but water.
The Mongol soldiers, mostly conscripted Song infantry, began to suffer. There was no fresh grain, no fodder for the thousands of horses. Thoat Hoan looked at the smoking ruins and realized that his initial intelligence had been worthless. He had marched 300,000 men into a massive, meticulously planned logistical trap. His supply lines were dangerously long and easily raided by local militias. Thoat Hoan's patience wore thin. As a prince, he was not accustomed to such squalor. Disease began to spread through the Yuan camp, weakening the conscripts. His victory had turned into a prolonged, miserable siege of an empty city. The initial Mongol confidence dissolved into frustration and anger. He needed food, and he needed it yesterday. All eyes turned south. The only hope lay with Thoat Hoan and his southern fleet. Thoat Hoan was supposed to bring supplies from Champa and link up with Thoat Hoan's army. But the delay was crushing. Every day the armies remained separated. The logistical advantage swung further to Tran Hung Dao and the small, resilient Dai Viet forces. Thoat Hoan knows he must act before his army starves to death or mutinies. He has a vast army, but it is quickly becoming a vast burden. The general must make a painful choice. Risk everything on one final, desperate push south to meet Thoat Hoan, or abandon the field entirely. This desperate need for food is the weakness Tran Hung Dao has been waiting for. While Thoat Hoan was mired in the logistical trap in Thang Long, in the relative safety of the rear, Tran Hung Dao was preparing for the final blow. He was in no rush. All elements, timing, terrain, and morale had converged to switch from defense to offense. The counterattack plan was a multifaceted maneuver designed not just to repel the Yuan forces, but to destroy their core units.
The time is right. I yielded the land, I yielded the city. Now is the moment to reclaim the entire nation.
The strategy was finalized with 3 decisive prongs of attack. The first prong, Tran Nha Duat was assigned the most critical task to strike at the Yuan army's supply lifeline. He had to block Thoat Hoan at the river mouth, the only route for the enemy's provision fleet. The second prong, Tran Quang Kai, would lead the elite forces to strike the abandoned capital of Thang Long. The goal was not only liberation, but to completely sever Thoat Hoan's retreat path. The third and most dangerous prong, Tran Hung Dao himself would lead the main army, waiting to deliver the decisive blow to Thoat Hoan as he was forced to flee Thang Long.
The enemy's arrogance has pinned them down. Now, their own desperation will guide them to the fate that awaits.
The crux of this plan was perfect time coordination. Tran Nha Duat had to succeed first to force Thoat Hoan to change course, placing critical pressure on the starving Thoat Hoan. Tran Hung Dao knew his soldiers were exhausted after weeks of defense and the Scorched Earth policy. However, they possessed something the Yuan forces lacked: the fighting spirit of men defending their homeland. The final orders were passed. There was no grand assembly, no rousing speeches, only absolute trust in the competence of his generals and the will of the people. The moment of ordering the counterattack was the most dangerous, as it traded the safety of defensive tactics for a decisive victory.
Quang Kai, remember, I do not need a flashy victory. I need a thorough one. Use your minds, not just your might.
The generals Tran Nha Duat and Tran Quang Kai moved swiftly. The 2 prongs of the attack began their movements simultaneously, one by water to sever supply, one by land to reclaim the capital. The atmosphere across Dai Viet changed. The tense silence of defense was replaced by the booming war drums of the counteroffensive. The real battle, where blood would spill and destiny would be decided, was beginning. The first crucial test of Tran Hung Dao's counterplan was assigned to his brother, Tran Not Duat. His mission was to intercept the colossal supply fleet of Thoat Hoan at Ham 2, the river gate to the north. Failure meant starvation for the Dai Viet and survival for the Mongols. Ham 2 was strategically vital, a narrow, complex stretch of the river where the vast Mongol fleet, designed for the open sea, would be most vulnerable. The atmosphere was one of quiet, lethal waiting. The fate of the entire war rested on this single naval engagement.
Do not slow the advance. We must reach the shore by nightfall.
Thoat Hoan, confident and ignorant of the disaster unfolding in Thang Long, moved slowly. His fleet was heavily burdened with grain, fodder, and supplies, making it an easy target for fast, hit-and-run attacks. Tran Not Duat employed a disciplined strategy of attrition. He did not seek a full-scale battle immediately. Instead, small, swift units darted out, fired arrows, and disabled the lead Mongol vessels. They retreated quickly into the intricate maze of tributaries, rendering the Mongols' heavier warships useless. This guerrilla warfare on the water frustrated the Mongol commanders, who were unable to corner or decisively engage the elusive Dai Viet forces.
Reform the lines! Protect the barges! Do not let them through!
The true blow came as the Mongol fleet entered the tightest bend of Ham 2. Tran Not Duat initiated a coordinated ambush, utilizing fire, ships, and strategically positioned archers hidden along the banks. The fire spread quickly across the tightly packed supply barges. The chaos was absolute. The Mongol soldiers, primarily seamen and supply handlers, were unprepared for the ferocity of the attack. The destruction of the supply ships was the core objective.
Keep pushing, men! Don't let
Grain burned, supplies sank, and the immense logistical effort of Thoat Hoan was reduced to ash and debris within hours.
Food lost here is a victory for our starving people in the north.
The battle was not about killing men, but about severing the lifeline of the entire invasion. The fire was uncontrollable. With his supplies destroyed, Thoat Hoan was faced with a stark choice: retreat or attempt, a desperate push north with an empty belly. He chose the latter, foolishly hoping to meet Thoat Hoan. It sent a clear message to the Mongol forces that their supply route was gone forever.
To the Emperor! To Dai Viet! Victory is ours!
This victory was the turning point. It was the signal for the second and third prongs of the counterattack to be launched simultaneously. The morale of the Dai Viet forces surged. News of the burning Mongol fleet spread like wildfire, transforming fear into aggressive confidence across the land. The stage was now set for Tran Quang Kai to move on the empty capital of Thang Long.
Onward!
The two Mongol armies were now separate, confused, and irrevocably doomed by hunger and a lack of coordination. They were being hunted.
Get him! Hold him down! I will not yield! Who are you? Where is your fleet?
This war will not end easily. We must be prepared for the next phase.
Hamtu is ours! The Northern Star now belongs to Quang Kai. Our victory is assured. Now, forward to Thang Long!
With the Ham 2 victory secured by Tran Not Duat, the signal was given for the second spearhead to strike. General Tran Quang Kai led the elite forces toward the occupied capital, Thang Long. The objective was simple: reclaim the city and completely cut off Thoat Hoan's path north.
No time for glory, only action! The fire of Ham 2 lights our path! Drive them out, now, before their despair turns to rage! The wall is coming down! Retreat!
Intelligence confirmed the Mongols were starving and disorganized, their morale shattered by the loss of their supplies and the Scorched Earth policy. Thoat Hoan received the devastating news and gave the humiliating order to abandon the capital. The Mongol forces, once an invading tidal wave, became a fleeing stream, disorganized and desperate to retreat south to the relative safety of the border.
Thang Long is not a prize of war. It is our beating heart. Show them the true, unleashed power of Daviate fury.
Fall back to the gate!
Tran Quang Kai met minimal resistance. The few remaining Mongol soldiers were quickly overwhelmed by the ferocity and determination of the liberating army. The liberation was swift but solemn. Tran Quang Kai rode into a city of ashes in silence. The city was scarred, but the spirit of the capital was unbroken. Soon, the first weary civilians began to emerge from their hiding places.
We have reclaimed the land, but at what cost? We mourn the ruins, but we celebrate the future.
The sight of the returning citizens and the reclaiming of the Daviate flag marked the true emotional turning point of the war. Meanwhile, the disgrace of Thoat Hoan's retreat was stark. He and his remaining troops were a defeated rabble, throwing away equipment to hasten their flight south. A humiliating failure after such an aggressive invasion. Their disorganized retreat proceeded exactly as Tran Hung Dao had calculated. They ran straight into the trap set by the main Daviate army.
He runs. Like a whipped dog, he runs directly into the maw of the trap. The lesson is learned. Now, the final hammer blow.
Thang Long is liberated!
The irony of the Mongol strategy was sealed. Thoat Hoan, pushing north with an empty fleet, was completely unaware that Thoat Hoan was desperately fleeing south, resulting in a disastrous lack of coordination. Isolated and without a supply line, Thoat Hoan was now navigating a river controlled by Tran Not Duat towards a city already secured by Tran Quang Kai.
The supplies are gone. The river burns. But my duty is to the Great Khan. I will push north. I will find them. General, Thang Long is liberated.
In Thang Long, Tran Quang Kai swiftly consolidated his position, turning the liberated capital into a fortress. He was now positioned to join the main force and administer the final blow.
Fortify the gates immediately.
The stage was set for the final, decisive confrontation. The pursuit was on. The Mongol war machine had been broken into isolated, panicked fragments. Every village, every forest, and every river was now hostile territory. The victory was palpable. Only the final elimination remained. The main Daviate army was closing in from all sides.
No supplies. No reinforcements. No escape. My father's promise, a humiliating retreat.
The second phase of Tran Hung Dao's master trap was now fully engaged. The relentless pursuit. While Thoat Hoan fled south, Thoat Hoan continued north, directly into the waiting jaws of the Daviate forces. Tran Hung Dao delegated the chase, confident in his general's strategy.
The hour of the rout is upon them. No mercy for the vanguard. They must pay the price for their prince's folly.
Thoat Hoan's forces were depleted and starving, forced to cross treacherous terrain like swamps and dense forests. They were constantly harassed by local militias, turning every step into a desperate fight for survival.
And is fleeing south. It is a trap.
The general finally received the intelligence that shattered his desperate hope. Thoat Hoan had abandoned the capital and was in full humiliating retreat.
Thang Long abandoned? The prince fled? My duty, my supplies, all for nothing. We are cut off. We are doomed. We must secure the river crossing by dawn.
The realization of the trap was complete. Thoat Hoan was completely isolated, far from any friendly force, surrounded by a hostile land. He attempted one final desperate order: flee towards the sea for a potential escape. But the Daviate pursuit was swift and precise. Tran Hung Dao's forces had already cut off the coastal routes, trapping Thoat Hoan between the jungle and the sea.
Let no path remain open to the sea. The net is closed. We take the general alive, or we take his head. No quarter. Form the circle. Weapons ready.
The encirclement was complete. Thoat Hoan and his small, loyal remnant were cornered in a narrow clearing. The Mongol forces, facing certain death, prepared for their final stand. The Daviate general commanding the pursuit gave the final order to charge. The short battle was brutal and swift.
I serve the great Khan faithfully. I will not kneel to these savages. Come then, you peasants. Come and claim my defeat.
The fall of Thoat Hoan was confirmed almost immediately. His death eliminated the last substantial threat to the Dai Viet's rear and neutralized the entire southern prong of the Mongol invasion.
My lord,
The captured banner and the news were sent immediately to Tran Hung. The strategic elimination was complete.
Satisfactory outcome. One head has fallen. The threat of reinforcements is neutralized. The game is simplified. Now, we turn our full attention to the main quarry.
The focus shifted entirely to the main objective. Thoat Hoan, Tran Hung allowed the prince to escape along a specific, controlled route toward the coast, a move calculated to funnel him into the ultimate killing ground. The Mongol invasion was now reduced to a single, fleeing, humiliated prince and his small, terrified escort.
gone. They are all gone. I escaped with my life, but nothing more. My glory, my name.
The long chase was over. Thoat Hoan, the once proud prince, stumbled onto the coastline, his entire invasion force broken into a handful of terrified men. The sea was his last desperate hope of survival, a desperate escape from the hostile land that had consumed his army.
The land rejects us, but the sea is wide. We will escape this jungle, and I swear.
Far from the coast, Tran Hung prepared the final, inescapable trap. His gaze fell upon the Bach River Delta, a location of immense strategic importance where the tide could be weaponized. The final orders were given to prepare the stakes.
Faster! The enemy approaches! The water is their strength, but the tide is ours. We will make the river our executioner.
Trained naval units worked tirelessly, hammering large, iron-tipped wooden stakes deep into the muddy riverbed. They were positioned to remain hidden beneath the surface at high tide, only to emerge as deadly defenses when the water receded. Meanwhile, Thoat Hoan loaded his few remaining men onto hastily acquired ships.
He takes the bait. He sees freedom, but he sails toward doom. The tide serves Dai Viet. Let the
Tran Hung met with Tran Not Duat and Tran Quang Kai. The three generals confirmed the synchronized plan. The entire Mongol retreat path was calculated to funnel Thoat Hoan's ships into the deadly delta.
All ships, full sail ahead! Do not look back!
Move! Move! Cut those lines now!
The prince of the great Khan, fleeing like a peasant. But I live. I will not die here. This failure is temporary. The retreat is tactical.
Excellent progress, my forces.
As Thoat Hoan's pitiful fleet began its journey, the final disposition of the Dai Viet forces was confirmed. Tran Hung army moved into their hidden, strategic positions, surrounding the river from the high ground.
The moment is upon us. The trap is sprung. Let the tide turn. Sound the horns.
sound the drums.
A tense, profound silence settled over the river delta. The waters flowed calmly, concealing the 1,000 deadly points beneath. Thoat Hoan's ships drew closer, unknowingly sailing on the surface of their own watery grave. The tide was at its peak, and the final moments of the invasion were ticking away with the current.
CO2's army poised on the banks.
The water is prepared. The general awaits. The final battle for the spirit of the nation is set.